All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Affirm 101, Getting Started with Eureka Math Digital Assessments. My name is Ileana Betancourt, and I'm the Marketing Manager here at Edulastic. I'm excited to be here with you as members of the Eureka Math and Edulastic team joined together today to give you this thorough overview of Affirm. And I know it looks like some of you are brand new to it. Some of you are pretty familiar with it already. Affirm is a great tool for delivering top quality Eureka Math assessments for saving time and for getting instant data and feedback. So again, excited to have you here as we provide today's overview. So today we have two fantastic people who will be presenting the main portion of today's event. I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves and hand it off to them.
Great, I guess I'll start. My name's Hannah Chasnov. I am the Senior Associate Product Manager at Great Minds, previously a second grade teacher at a charter school in New York City, and I'm excited to show you the platform today, talk a little bit about Affirm and Eureka Math. Jenny?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jenny. I originally found Edulastic as a classroom teacher, and I was using it in my classroom at a charter school. And that was a couple of years ago. And since then, I've been working with Edulastic on the customer success team. And I train districts and teachers all over the country on how to use Edulastic. So I'm looking forward to this session with you all right now, too.
All right, so let's get started. Let's talk about today's agenda. So I'm going to kick off today's call by giving you some information about Affirm in general, what features you get access to with Affirm, some ways we recommend that you use Affirm with Eureka Math, and then how to log in and access your account. I'll then turn it over to Jenny to walk us through the Edulastic platform. She'll show you how to find those Eureka Math assessments, modify an assessment, and create an assessment from scratch. We'll then go over some of the assessment settings, how to assign the assessment, and then how to view those live data and reports. Lastly, after walking through the platform, we'll wrap up with some additional resources to share and have plenty of time for questions. So a lot to get through today, and hopefully it will help you all get started if you haven't gotten started yet with Affirm. And if you have, hopefully there'll be some things in there that you'll learn new as well. So a quick review about Affirm. Affirm is the Eureka Math digital assessment and practice tool and is powered by Edulastic. With Affirm, you really get the best of both Eureka Math curriculum and the Edulastic platform. On the Eureka Math side, you have access to over 4,000 questions in grades 1 through 9 that are completely aligned with the curriculum. These questions take the form of an item bank, topic quizzes, as well as module level assessments. And these are a completely different set of questions than what you see in the print curriculum. On the Edulastic side, you have access to all of the features in your free teacher accounts if you were previously using that. This includes access to the public bank, so questions that other teachers may have created and shared on the platform, as well as the ability to write your own questions from scratch. So you might choose to supplement your Eureka Math assessment with some of these questions from the public item bank. Lastly, you also have access to all of Edulastic's enterprise features. So this includes premium teacher and district level reporting, the ability to shuffle questions, to turn on text to speech, and a number of other settings that are only available to our paying customers and customers of Affirm. So how is Affirm intended to be used with Eureka Math? Every school or district may have a different purpose in using digital assessments. And that really is one of the great things about having assessments in this format is that it allows for a lot of flexibility and for different users, different schools and districts to use these items in different ways. First off, we have district or schools that might want to use these assessments as common assessments. This is a great way to replace the print assessments and also to norm assessments and data collecting across different schools and classes. Secondly, we have teacher or class level assessments. So as a teacher, you may want to assign assessments directly to your class in order to check for mastery, to assign something between sort of school and district level higher stake assessments, and just to receive more constant feedback from students on where they need additional support. Lastly, on the third and fourth point, in addition to assigning formal assessments using Affirm, we really do encourage teachers to use this platform for practice and for remediation. The platform allows you to easily search for questions across grade levels. Every teacher has access to all of the questions across the grade bands, and this allows you to customize assessments to test those skills that your students need the most practice with. So as you begin using this platform, I encourage you all to consider these different ways of using the platform and really think about what is going to work best for you and your students in order to get the most out of this product. All right, let's talk about accessing Affirm now. I know the majority of you have already logged in some way and begun to assign assessments to your classes, but there are a few different ways that I wanted to talk about. So the first one here, the direct link. Many of you should have received this in your welcome email. To log in using the direct link, go to www.greatminds.org/affirm, and that should bring you to the login page you see here on the right. Once your account has been created, you can log in using Google, Office 365, Clever, or just by typing in your username and password onto the page. Those of you who are using Clever, you can access Affirm directly from your Clever dashboard via the Edulastic app. So click on the app and it will take you directly to your dashboard already signed in. Those of you who are using Google Classroom, your students can access their assessments directly from Google Classroom as long as their teachers assigned it to their feed. So very convenient for students and teachers to be able to log in using different ways depending on what systems you're already using in your classrooms. Lastly, you can also access Affirm directly from the Great Minds website. So I wanted to talk about this one in a little more detail because in addition to accessing the login page for Affirm, there are some other resources on the Great Minds website that I think you'll find useful. So I'm going to show you that. Going to www.greatminds.org. If you already have an account, you log right in. If you haven't, it's very easy for you to go ahead and create an account, put in your name, email address, and there are a ton of resources on here in addition to Affirm that you'll find helpful in implementing Eureka Math. Go to your dashboard. Click on the product key. And you should feel free to share this code with other teachers at your school using Affirm. The product key is EM Affirm. Submit, click on Eureka Math Affirm. And that will add Affirm to your dashboard on your Great Minds website along with your digital suite or any other resources that you already have here. This first link, the Training Hub, takes you to a collection of videos, documents that you can download to help with your implementation of the product. And the second one here, Affirm Digital Assessment. If I click on it, will take you straight to your dashboard for Affirm. Now, if you haven't logged in yet, it will take you to your login page first. If you're already logged in, it will take you right to your dashboard where you can begin to assign assessments or analyze your data. So really is a quick way, one-stop shop for you to access all of your Eureka Math materials. All right, I'm going to take a pause here if there are any questions about Edulastic, about Eureka Math, about Affirm, about how to access it. And if there isn't anything, then I'm going to hand it over to Jenny to walk through the platform now. All right, Jenny, handing it over to you.
Great. Let me just share my screen. So you'll see that I've logged in already and I've been put right at the dashboard. And this is, let's see here, I'm just going to close a box real quick while we're, all right, thank you. Okay, so on the dashboard, so I know that there's a significant number of you who have not logged in before. So I will take just a few minutes to talk about the navigation in Edulastic once you're in here. And then we'll move on to some of the other deeper points. And so for those of you that have already done this and used this, I'll be showing you some best practices or some little tips and tricks along the way to make the most out of Edulastic. So from the dashboard, you'll automatically see the classes that you have created, and you'll always start here at the dashboard. You create your classes in a couple of ways. Down at the very bottom of the navigation screen here, you'll have Manage Class. And if you are using Clever, those classes should automatically be populated based on your student information system. If you're not using Clever, you can create your own classes in a couple of ways. So you can create your class by going to the Manage Class, selecting the Create Class button, and you can manually set up a class. You follow the prompts, save it, and then it allows you to add your students or to add the roster. The other way that you can do it is if you're a Google Classroom user, you can just sync with Google Classroom, and that's this button here. And when you push this, it'll prompt you to enter or select your account and then enter your Google Class code if you need to. And then it will automatically populate your roster. And so when it's populated, it looks something like this, where you'll have all of your students listed out. And here I want to point out a couple of management things, class management things. If you have any students that are need to have text-to-speech enabled, you would do that here on the Manage Class, and you would select the name, and then over here under Actions, you would enable or disable text-to-speech. When you're setting this up for one student, this same the feature for text-to-speech will flow to all of the classes that the student's account is in. So this will, by turning it on in your class, if you are a middle school teacher, for example, this student will have text-to-speech turned on for them in their other classes as well. So that's just one point to remember, is that the text-to-speech follows the student account. If you want to turn it on temporarily for all of your students, like for example, if you're practicing something where text-to-speech is necessary, you can turn it on and enable it, and then you just come back here, select them all again, and then disable it. So that's a couple of options you have with text-to-speech. If you are manually adding your students, you can do it in a couple of ways. You can add a student here, and you just fill in each individual student's information. Or you can add multiple students here. And there's three ways you can do it. You can do it by pasting Google usernames, or if you use Office 365, you can paste those usernames, or you could just enter the first and last name or the last and first, and it will automatically create a student's username and password for them. So we do have a couple of videos in our training hub, the Getting Started series, and I believe it's also on the Affirm training hub, where you can learn how to do the details of setting up your roster. But it's actually very simple, and once you do it, if you have to add a student, you can do it manually. You can just update it through Google Classroom if you want to just refresh it if you have a student come or go. And this is where all of that happens. So that's the Manage Class. Now let's just jump back up here to the dashboard. From the dashboard, you'll have a couple of different boxes here. We've got the assessments page, and that lists all of the assessments that you've created or that have been assigned to your class. It looks like this. The question bank is where all of the questions that are entered by teachers, by your colleagues, or by yourself, or through the Great Minds or Eureka Math libraries, all of those live in this question bank. The next thing down is the library, and the library has, where the question bank just has individual questions, the library has complete assessments that you can use and identify. Next, the reports. And the reports, there's 4 different types of reports. There's a single assessment report, which gives you a very deep dive into one assessment or one assignment. Multiple assessment allows you to compare several over time. The standards mastery report will give you an understanding of where your students are falling in terms of mastery of each of the standards that have been tested. And then the student profile report dives down into just all of the information about a single student. Then last down here, I'm just going to jump. Here's a little getting started video. This is a bit of it'll take you to a tutorial section. And then also we have the help center. So these are all part of sort of the navigation section. To start today, since I've talked to you already about managing your class and given you a tool to learn about rostering, which was the videos. I'm going to start now by jumping into the assessment library. So I'm going to take us down here to the middle here to the library, and I'll click on that. There are actually 3 ways that you can create an assignment or an assessment for your students. The first is that you go to the assessment library and you can find an assessment that's already created and just assign it to your students. So the assessment library is organized with some features that are much like a Google Drive or a Google dashboard if you're used to using those. At the top here, you have the most recent things that you've worked on, and this can be hidden. I like to keep it hidden so it just keeps my library as clean as possible. And then in the library, you've got a couple of ways here on the left of how you can sort and organize your assessments. And then in the middle here, you've got filters that you can search on. You can set some filters to search on the assessments that you're looking for. So right now, this filter is set for grade 2 mathematics. It's the Eureka Math collection, and we're working with Math Common Core. That's where the Eureka Math items are found. So if you wanted to change that, you could do it a couple ways. You could reset all the filters, and then you can select new. So we'll do grade 3, subject will be math. The standard set is Common Core. And then you could drill down to a set of standards if you wanted to specifically pick that. For this demo, I'm going to leave it open so you can see the breadth of assignments. And then the collection, you're going to look for the Eureka Math collection. A moment about, I'll touch a little bit on the collections. The private library is everything that you've created automatically gets stored into your private library, whether they're in draft form or they're published and being used by you. Nobody can see these in the private library but you. The school library and the district library are places that you can share assessments that you've modified or created with your colleagues. The public library is anybody who has contributed to Edulastic. It falls into the public library. Edulastic certified is items that have been approved or commissioned by Edulastic. And last, here's the Eureka Math library. So we'll stick with that. Oops, I deselected it. Let me reselect. And then the status is published or draft. We're going to just leave that blank for now. And then you can apply the filter. So once I've applied it, now it's pulled up. I have 80 assessments that match this criteria. And you can see actually I've saved this filter previously because I've used this often. But what you can do is select, once you've found the filter that you're using most frequently, whether it's standards based or based on just a grade and a subject. You notice I just picked a standard NBT A1. And so now I'm going to apply this filter. It'll siphon it down to the 6 assessments, and I'm going to save this filter. And it gives me an opportunity to name it. So I'm going to do 3rd grade NBT 1. And I'll save it, and then you'll notice on the left side of the screen here it pops up. So if I wanted to go back to this one, I don't have to reset all the filters each time. I can just pop right into it. So as you see, I popped on that, and now I'm back to just the generic 3rd grade math with 80 assessments. So the first thing that you can do, and the easiest way to use Edulastic, is if you know what you're looking for, you can drop down right into an assessment. You can take a look at it. You can preview it as a student would see it. If you know it's something you're planning on using and it will work for your class, you can just directly assign it. So you would just
I want to take a minute, Jenny, to talk about the different types of assessments that we see here in the Eureka Math collection. So you'll see some of these assessments are in green, some are in gray. Really, there are 3 types of assessments that our team has written for you. The ones in gray, they are labeled the item bank. Those ones contain 2 to 3 questions for the topic per lesson. So really, they're quite a large collection of items and really is intended to be used as an item bank for teachers to go in and select certain questions to use. The ones in green, you have the topic quiz and the mid-module assessments, as well as end-of-module assessments. those ones are carefully designed so that they take 15 minutes for a topic quiz and no more than a class period for the module level assessment. So our intention behind those are that you are assigning them as is, that it really doesn't require much modification. And then one more thing I wanted to point out is just the search bar up top. So the filters in Edulastic are great. They help you narrow down the standards, the collections, but sometimes you know exactly what assessment you're looking for in what module, what topic. In that case, the search bar is there so you can narrow down and look for the exact assessment that you're looking for.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. So you would just type in something like mid, and you could find just the mid modules. Assessments or end of assessment modules, or if you're just looking for the item banks. Let's see, I'm just going to reset this filter. So picking up where we left off, if one of these assessments or something you're ready to just give directly, you can just click on the box and you can assign it directly from here. You can also preview it. You can get an idea of the number of questions, the standards that are covered, and then if you scroll down, you can actually look at each of the questions and you can see, if you click on them, you can see the correct answer. So you have a way of previewing these and making it work for you. So if this is exactly what you were looking for, you had time to do an 11-question quiz, then you could just assign it directly by hitting this button. The other option that you have, and let me back up, you could do that with any assessment in the assessment library, or if it works for you, but you need to modify it just a little bit, you can also do that. So this is the second way that you can create an assignment in Edulastic, is to find an assessment that exists, and then you're going to create a new version of it. And so by creating a new version, you're pulling it out of the library, and now it's back into now it's located in your private library. So you can modify this to make it work for your students or your class. When I clicked create a new assessment, it took me to this publishing screen. And so I have this information box that'll give me the assessment details, and this runs along the side. It's also very much like a Google Drive where you can hide some of this information and just keep it clean. So now on this view, I can take a look at the question. I can see the tags. Each question is tagged with the module name and the standards as well. And so I can also modify the point value here. And I can, if I click in it, I can preview it again. So if this is something that I want to use, maybe I just need to break it down. I need a few less questions because I don't have time for 11 questions, for example. So I'm going to select a couple that I'm going to remove. And also you can reorder them. So if you wanted to change the order, there's two ways you can do that. You can grab this little bar and just drag it down. This is most useful if you're just moving it 1 or 2 spots. It's much easier to do it that way. If you're moving it to the end of the assessment or somewhere deeper in the assessment, you can click on the question you want to move and then just select reorder and put the position in. So I know this now has 9 questions. I'm going to move this down to position 8. And the check mark will follow you down. And so if I scroll down here, I'll see that it's this is the one I just moved, and now it is in position number 8. So as I've changed this around, you'll notice that this summary has changed here. I now have 9 questions. These are the standards that are covered. This is the number of questions that cover NBT A1, number of questions that cover A2, and the number of questions that cover MD A2. These are the question types that are covered here, so you can be sure that you're giving your students a good variety of question types. And I'm going to just hide this. So let's say that this worked for me. I removed 2 questions. I might remove 2 more here, but I did want to add 1 other question. So you have the option of adding to this too when you're modifying it. So to add, you would go up here to add from the question bank, and this little icon will take me back into the question bank. You'll see it remembers my filters, but I could go a little deeper. Like, for example, a use case might be that I wanted my students to have some experience with drag and drop style of questions. So I wanted to add that for these standards to this test. So what I would do first is I would jump down here to the question types, and I'm going to just type a D in here. and I'll find the drag and drop. And so now it's filtered. There's 24 drag and drop style questions for 3rd grade math in the Eureka Math modules. So I think I'll go down just one more level. I need to select Math Common Core, and then I will come over here and we'll do one more NBT. Let's see if I can grab one of these. And I have 7 questions that are drag and drop that match these standards. So if I want to go ahead and preview that, I could click on it and take a look. Or I'm going to cancel out of here. You can also just directly add it. And so now I know that I've added that. If I look at my running record here, I now have 8 questions. If you remember, I removed 2 when I had 9, so it went down to 7, and now I'm back at 8. And it's added the information here, and I have a drag and drop style question. So this is one of the ways you can modify, excuse me, I pushed a button. This is one of the ways that you can modify an assessment by adding your own questions. There's another way that you can do it too, and you can author your own questions. So by
I do want to add something, Jenny, in terms of searching for assessments. You may find that you want to search for questions to add from a particular part of the curriculum. So if you wanted to add a question from a specific module or a lesson, there aren't filters to do that, but there is the search bar again that will allow you to do that. So if you notice all of the questions, when she clears those filters, the questions are tagged according to where in the curriculum they appear. So the blue box that you see under each question, it says the first one there, grade 3, module 3, topic B, lesson 15, question 1. So the search bar works in a way where you can search for any section of that tag starting from the beginning. So for that first question, I want to find more questions in grade 3, module 5, topic D. I can go ahead and type in G3_M5_TD, or the long form if you prefer, press enter. And those are the questions in this item bank that are aligned specifically to this topic. And in this case, that are also drag and drop. So just an extra feature to put out there if you wanted to create exit tickets or, just short quizzes that follow specific lessons or topics, you have this to do as well.
Thank you. And so on this one, I could just then add it, and now it's part of my assessment again. So let me back out of here. If I wanted to then author a new question, if I wanted to create my own, you would select this Author New Question button, and it takes you to a series of widgets that allow you to create classic question types, tech enhanced types. And to learn how to do each one of these question types, there's a little help tool here. And if you just look for this question mark in the corner, it will launch a short video that walks you through each one of the question types. So this is a really valuable way to expand the types of questions you're used to building, because even while you're in the question itself, you can grab this little question mark and watch the tutorial. Because there are such extensive tutorials, I'm going to skip this part of it, but if you wanted to find how to create different types of questions, I mentioned you could get them here. It's also in the Help Center. You can search on creating question types. It'll take you to a series of videos that we have created on our YouTube channel that show you how to build each one of these question types. So let me cancel out of here. I'm going to stop for a second and just give you sort of a summary of what we've done so far. So we started in the assessment library, and we found an assessment that we wanted to use. And then we either had the choice of assigning it directly as is, or we could modify it. And you could modify it by removing, reordering, adding additional questions from the question bank, or authoring your own. So once you've done that, you've kind of customized this assessment to be perfect for your students, then you're ready to either publish it or assign it. And then you'll click this button, and it takes you to the assign screen if you're ready to assign. Or if you want to publish it and just use it later, you can select that button. It's now stored in the private library, and so I can change this to be shared with the school or others in my district. I'll cancel out of that. So it's staying in my private library because this is just a demo one. I don't want to clutter the assessment or clutter the library. But I can share it with others here. And then when I'm ready to assign, I can either find it in my library or I can go ahead and assign it. I didn't mention you are able to change the name. Back here on the review page, you can change the name and you can modify the image as well. Let me get back into here. So let me jump here and I'll click on that. You'll see it right here. I'll click on that. If I wanted to edit the name, I could just click edit, or if I wanted to make other edits, I still could. I'm going to change this to, we'll call this webinar version so we don't get it confused. And then if you click outside of it, it'll save that. You can change it you can change the image by uploading one from your desktop. And then when you're ready to publish or assign, you'll select this. And so let me spend a few minutes on the assign screen because there are some options that you have. And if you've used Edulastic in the past as a free version, you'll notice that as the premium version, there are a far greater set of options when you're assigning an assessment. So the first thing I'll talk about is the open and close date. So you can set the testing window here, and you can even go down to increments of 5 minutes, and you can see that here. So if you wanted, for example, for it to open in an afternoon class or for a certain period, if you're teaching classes that change or shift, you can set it for a certain time to open. And then the close date. So you can set the close date for, let's set this one for 2 weeks out, and I'll have it close at the end of the day. So I'm just modifying the time here. The next consideration is the open and close policy. So when you've set it to automatically on start date, this means that as soon as November 1st at 1:10 p.m., any student that you've assigned it to will be able to access this assessment. And that's fine for class quizzes or class assignments, homework assignments, anything that it doesn't matter if the students can access it at any time. If you're dealing with a high stakes assessment, or you're dealing with older students who you maybe needs to have a little tighter parameters around, and you don't want first period, for example, when first period sees the assessment, you don't want sixth period to be able to see it as well, then you would change this to open manually in class. And that just requires the teacher to push the button open for the students to access it. The close policy is the same. It can automatically shut down and no students will be able to access it on this close date, or you can close manually in class. And closing manually in class is what I usually recommend to the districts that I work with, because it gives you the most control over this close date. If it automatically closes and you have absent students, or you've had, for example, snow days, or around a flu and the students haven't been in class during this window, then if it's closed automatically, it will shut it down and you'll have to reopen another version of this and reassign it to your students, and the data will tend to be separated as well. So if you close it manually in class, what that does is it just keeps this open regardless of what the close date is. The close date becomes more of a suggestion, really, instead of a firm and fast rule. So close manually in class gives you the most freedom or the most control. Next, you're going to select who you're going to assign it to. So if you've got several periods of classes, you might select all of them, or if you just have one, or you have your students separated in groups, you can select just the one or two. Then you can also select all the students in that class or just a subset of them as well. So this is being assigned to just 2 students. The next thing I'll show you is the superpowers section, which is essentially like the behavior of the assessment. And how the students see it, and some of the features that the students have while they're taking the assessment. So the first mark is done automatically or manually. I want to spend just a second talking about the different states of an assessment in Edulastic. If an assessment can be open, and that means anybody can access it, an assessment can be marked as closed, which means the students can't access it, but the teachers can be grading it. And if a student needs a retake or if there's an absent student, it can still be reassigned as long as it's not marked as done. Once it's marked as done, it's shut down and there's no more access to the assessment. And so if you think of it a little bit like put your pen, you finished a test, put your pencils down and pass your test forward while I take a look at them. That's the closed version. And then the done version is basically we've moved on, your grades have been entered into the books, and we're on another chapter now. So that's sort of the difference. So if it's automatically marked as done and you're not ready for it to be done, then it could close out some of those students. So that's a consideration. I usually save it on manually just as a precaution, and again, a little more control. The next set of options you have here are to release the scores, which means when the students hit submit at the end of their assessment, they can see their percentage and their raw scores, and that counts, that they'll see that for anything that is automatically graded in Edulastic. If there is an open essay question, for example, they'll see their score without that included. So the choice of releasing scores is here. You can also choose to show the questions and the answers to the students, and the correct answers actually. So the students could see, if both of these are set to on, the students could see their scores. They could see their the answers that they chose, and the answers that should have been chosen are all of the right answers. This is really useful actually for a homework assignment or an in-class assignment when you want immediate feedback. But if it's something like a high-stakes benchmark where you don't want the information circulating among the students, then turning the questions and answers off, but they could possibly see their scores, that's an option. Or the tightest level of control is that they don't see their scores and they don't see any answers or questions until you decide to release them, and you can release them at a later date. So I'll just keep
say something to consider too is whether or not there are any open-ended questions in the assessment. In the case where there are any open-ended questions that require the teacher to go in and manually grade them, you're likely going to want to withhold those scores because students will see a score that doesn't accurately reflect what they're actually going to get. So just something to consider as well.
Great. The next options you have are you can shuffle the questions and you can shuffle the answers. Shuffle the answers won't work if you've got text-to-speech turned on. So if you've got any students that need to use that, then you shouldn't shuffle the answer choices. Finally, you can choose to show a calculator or not. The answer on paper, this is an option that you can leave on. It was originally created when we needed to, if you wanted to print a version, you turned it on. However, you can print versions of any assessment now from the dashboards, or excuse me, from the assessments tab. So this answer on paper is, it can be just left on. You've got a level here now that requires password, and this is a level of security that you can consider. If you have an issue where the students might be sharing the information or would have access to it outside of class, you could require a password that you would give to the students at the beginning of the session. And so you would just type in the password here, and then once the students had the password, then they would be able to access the assessment. And then finally, we've got an evaluation method. So if you're using any questions that have more than one part to it, you can choose to give them, they have to get all of the parts right, or they get no credit, or you can give them partial credit. And then you also have the option of whether or not you're going to penalize them for an incorrect selection. So it would typically be something like all or nothing, depending, or partial credit, depending on, teachers use this depending on what the rules are, for lack of a better word, on their spring assessment. So they mimic the grading that the students would be experiencing with the standardized tests at the end of the year. The mastery and proficiency modules down here at the bottom, let me expand this. these are typically set at a district level, and if you have received a common assessment from from an administrator, for example, these would already be set and you wouldn't be able to manipulate them as a teacher. However, if it's a class assignment that a teacher is giving, the teacher can manipulate these cut scores a little bit. So you can increase or decrease these for proficiency levels. And then you can also do the same thing for mastery, for the performance thresholds on mastery level. So again, these are set already at a district level, and so you can, in your own classroom, if exceeding mastery is something more like 92%, you can set that and accept it, and then it'll adjust. You can adjust all of the bands. So once you have set all of these options here, you've got the open and close date, the open and close policy, who it's going to, how they're going to see it, and then how the data is going to look for you in terms of mastery and performance. Then you're ready to assign it. So you would just push the assign button and it would be sent out to your students. At this point, you've got a couple of options for the data. So while the students are taking it, you can go over here to the assessment and you can watch on the live class board as the students are taking their assessment. I'm going to show you one that's already been built. If I showed you the one that we just created won't have any data in it. So we'll jump down here to one that's in progress. And I clicked on the name of the assessment and now I can go to the two classes. I've got this one is done and this one is in progress. I see that 10 out of 10 have submitted it, and I have 0 out of 10 that have started this one. So I'm going to jump over here so you can get an idea of what the power of this live class board actually can be for you. So this is building as the students are adding their answers. This graph is building, and so you can see the color coding is one of the things I like the best because it immediately lets you zero in on which question is an issue, and then by looking down here at the student cards you can tell which students are having the biggest issue, and it's the color coding that makes it really easy to zero in on this. So let me jump back up here. We're going to start with the average score of the class as a whole, and then this is broken out by each question. The green shows the number of correct answers, and the yellow shows the partially correct answers. Red will show you the wrong answers. Gray means that it was skipped, so one student skipped this one. And if you have a blue line, that is indicating an open-ended question that the teacher needs to go in and grade. The other thing to point out here is that you've got this blue line that travels through the bar graph, and it gives you the average time spent on that question by the class. So you can get oops, I clicked on, okay, so that's one thing you can do is you can click on one of the questions. This took me to question 5, and I get a breakdown of what each one of the students did and what their answers were. So this is all for question 5, and this is each one of the students by initial. I can see how long each one of the students spent on each of these questions. And then I can also scroll down and I can look at all of the students' answers here for question 5 all in a row. This is really useful if you're using some kind of an open-ended question that you need to grade. You can just grade everybody's question 5 at once rather than bouncing back and forth to each student. And then you can shuffle through to the next question by just going through here. The other nice thing is that you can add comments here. So if I added a comment right here, it would go directly to my student's version. The student would see the comment. I could just put something like "great job" and then save it, and the student then would see that. I can also, if I'm watching them and I'm seeing their work, for example, if they've used the scratch pad, I can give extra credit here. I can modify the scores, and you can do that as you go down through each student. You also have the option of looking at the solution. This little box here, whoops, oh, this one doesn't have solutions on it. There is sometimes on questions that have solutions, it'll show up, let's find one maybe over here that does. It'll show up with the common misconceptions that students have. And so it'll give the teacher and even the student a little explanation about each one of those. each one of those questions.
The multiple choice and multiple select questions will have.
There we go. So I clicked on question 1 and I see this view solution. And so it gives you a little overview. A is incorrect, B and C is correct, and why or how a student might have arrived at that question, or excuse me, arrived at that answer. And so it gives the teacher an opportunity to point that out to the students. So in addition, so you can drill down by question level, and in addition to that, you can now do a drill down on one student. Let me step back for a second and show you with this color coding, it's really obvious that this student is struggling the most of the class. And if you look at their performance scores, that proves to be true. She's got a 4.6 out of 11. Others here you can see, you can kind of find some of the red, and the red and yellow then just instantly indicate the issues, that the students that are having issues. So if I wanted to drill down into that one student, I can click on her name, and now I can see all of her questions, and I can give her feedback about the test overall, or I can give feedback at a question level here. And I can scroll through just like I did the others and see how she answered each question. So let me back out of here. So as you're working on the live class board, each one of these bars are building as a student answers the question. So you're really actually seeing it in real time. This report will stay there for you though, even when it's closed, and you can always go back to this information and get a quick summary of how these students are doing. If you had a student that was absent, what you would do is click on the student's name and then go to this more, and you can mark the student as absent. You can mark them, you can add students to this assessment. Like if you had a student that came to the class, you could add more students. Or if you had a student that shouldn't be taking this assessment right now, you could remove them. Here you can also download an individual student's grades or their responses. So you've got a lot of actions here under the more. If a student needed to retake it, so let's say in the situation here where our student that struggled, she happened to have a bad day and I knew that, so I wanted to give her a chance to redo it. I could select this button and then I can redirect it to her. And redirect is just the same as reassign, and she would then have another shot at it. And it would be the equivalent of a teacher handing a test back to the student, and maybe question 1 and 2 you ask them to redo. So they would still see all of their answers from the previous attempt, but they would have an opportunity to go in and change them and or update just the ones you wanted them to do. So that's the redirect function. So the next thing then is from the live class board, there's the Express Grader. Before I get to the Express Grader, it's a way that you can enter in scores or modify the scores of a student, the responses or the scores. It's also a way that you can get a table view. In order to access this, though, the students have to have submitted their assessment. So back here, if you have any students that are taking the assessment on paper, so if it's an IEP student, for example, or if it is a student that was just absent and couldn't take it online, if you have them, if you had them take it on paper, you need to mark their names and then mark their assessment as submitted. And so if you had a whole class, like a younger class that were only taking it on paper, you would select all the names and you would mark them as submitted. And that allows you then to go ahead and enter the data into the Express Grader. And this way you can have a paper version of the test, but still capture all of the data and be able to use the analysis that comes with the reports for even a paper version of the test. So that's in the Express Grader, and it gives you 3 ways of accessing this. You can just view it, and if you were to click on, for example, a student's name in view mode, you could see that student's answers, and you could also give feedback here. Let me just hit the back character here. And back on Express Grader, if I selected score entry, I could manipulate or modify or enter scores for the students. So let's just let this think for a second. There we go. By selecting score entry, it allows you to pop into one area and you can modify the score. So if, for example, I wanted to give a group of students extra credit because I saw their work, I could just click in there and I could modify the scores to add extra points or take away points if I needed to. If there was an error on a test, it happens occasionally, and you needed to just modify their scores, you could do that here. Or if you had a student that took it entirely on paper, then you could go through and just give them their grades by selecting here and entering their information. The response entry, you can add the actual letter responses or numerical responses for any of the classic question types or any of the question types like multiple choice where they would have a single answer. If it was a tech enhanced question like a drag and drop, for example, you'll see that indicated here by TEI. And you can't manipulate that, obviously, in this assessment or in the response entry. So the best that you could do in that situation was just give them full credit or partial credit or whatever their score is that they earned. So that's the Express Grader. Some teachers like it just because they like the view, the table view of this rather than the more visual view on the live class board. So that is also one use for it. The reports section, this is relatively new for Edulastic, relatively new tab here, and it's got two really powerful features here. On the assessment report, this will jump you immediately over to the reports and the single assessment report for this assessment. So it's like a quick link over rather than having to go to the reports and click in a couple of layers and set the filters to find it. This will take you immediately to the report for that assessment. And then the student report card is one of my favorite features of Edulastic, and with digital assessment, it's often very difficult to send something home for the parents or to store something in a student's file, for example. And the student report card allows that because it creates a printer-friendly version of a printer-friendly summary of each student's piece of work on this assessment. So you have some options here of what to choose. You can do the whole performance band. You can show how they've done on a question, what their actual response was, and what the correct answer should have been. And then you can show how they performed on the standards that were tested. So you don't have to have all of these selected. For this demo, I will so you can see the breadth of information. When I select Generate Report Cards, this is going to populate a page for each student. It gives the summary score up here, and then this one has all of the questions listed. The check mark shows that they got it correct, an X would show wrong. This is their answer, the correct answer, and their score. The student's name is up here, and then if I scroll down a little bit, a summary for the student on the domain, the standard, which questions tested that standard, what the total score was for that standard, and how they performed in terms of mastery of that standard on this assessment. So this is not a comprehensive summary, this is just how they performed on this assessment. So in this situation, this student, 3 of them, she was got 100% on. So she has mastered these standards on this assessment. And then there's one that she needs a little more help on. And so these 3 questions would be something, an area that she should have some reteaching. If I scroll down a little bit, I can see the next student's name. You continue to scroll down. So there's a page for each student. It's printer friendly. You can send it home and the parents can put it on the refrigerator like we would with a paper assessment. So I'll pop back over here. So I have gone through how to find an assessment in the library, how to find one and modify it, and then how to create your own questions. The one part I didn't really touch on is that you could create an entire assessment from scratch on your own as well using the author questions. There are, as I mentioned earlier, I walked you through how to do it, but there are a lot of options here to learn either through articles or through videos in the Getting Started and the Help Center. I'll spend just a few more minutes talking about the reports. And then I think we'll wrap up and open it up for questions.
Sounds great, Jen. Thank you. And I also just want to mention, I realize that we're getting towards the end of the hour. So quick thank you to everyone who's joining in. If you have to leave now, that's fine. We're going to finish up by touching on reports. If you have questions right now, feel free to enter them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll answer them in the chat before you go. Otherwise, hopefully you can stay on for a few more minutes as Jenny goes over reports, and then we can open up again.
And I'll lead with saying that if you go to the Help Center and just type in the word reports, you'll have access to several videos and articles that walk you through each one of these details. So if you do have to leave, that remember that that is a good resource for you. I'll start with the single assessment report, and this gives you a summary of how the class has done overall. You can jump over here to, the first and most important thing that you need to do is refine your results. And so this, by clicking this button, you'll get to the year, the course you want to look up, the classes, and the actual assessment. So we'll just stick with this one here. And on the assessment summary, you saw the overall grade and summary of the assessment, how the class did as a whole. On this peer performance, this is where you would be able to compare several of your classes. You could compare by student, by demographic information if you've entered that. You can also look at this by two ways of looking at the score, the raw and the percentage. And you can also look at how they're faring above and below standard, or by proficiency band. And I really like this one by proficiency band because you can see which group of students, how the overall group of how the group of students are doing in terms of proficiency. And I can see I've got 10% of my class that I need to zero in on and reteach this set of lessons. So that's the peer performance. The question analysis goes a little bit deeper and gives you a summary of which questions were the trickiest and leads all the way up to the questions that they did the best on. So always on the left side, you'll see the question that they performed the poorest on. So this one, 20% got this question 11 right. If you wanted to drill down and see what that question was, down here you could click on this and it would take you back to the question. You can also see the average time again that was spent on this. And the next tab, the response frequency, takes this data a little bit further. It takes it down one more level. And here I can see by question type, the one that was the trickiest for my students. And it helps you separate out, is it the question that they're not understanding how to perform, or is it the actual content that they need some help on? And down here you can see the questions and the questions that were the most tricky, who got only 20% got these correct, and you can see what the most frequently chosen answers were. So here 20% of them got this correct, and 80% of the class selected either A or B, which was incorrect. This gives, again, the teacher some strategies for talking to the students about why they might have chosen an incorrect answer. Let me scroll up here and I'll jump a little bit further. Performance by standards will break out how the students have performed on just this assessment. So these were the 4 standards that were tested, and you can see how they've performed on that. And then down below you get the list of students. So you can break out each student's score here. Next, you can have performance by students, which drills down into a specific group of students, and you can see, this is one of my favorites. I like to look at it by proficiency band and see, just grab just those students that are below basic, and then I can zero in on just this one student needs a little extra help. Or on the other side of it, I can look at the ones that were proficient and might be ready to move on. So you can sort it this way, or you can look at them all. That's the single assessment report. The multiple assessment report allows you to compare similar data, but compare more than one assessment. This is phenomenal for a pre and a post test, like a mid-module and end-of-module assessment where you want to see the progress from the first to the last. Again, you would refine the results and you could select as many assessments as you want. So I've got 1 here, I'll select 2. And I can compare their progress on just these 2 or more. So now I've got all 3 of them selected. I can look at the peer progress analysis, and this will show me for these assessments, what are the trends from the first to the last, and how many are trending up, how many are staying the same, and how many have a downward trend. So this one class showed a downward trend, and if you look at the data a little bit further, it's because they went from a 95 and finished with an 88. So that's not a terribly alarming scenario, but the color coding also does help you figure out where they're falling, zooming in exactly on if this is a real issue. If it went from, for example, 95 down to 65, that would be a more of a worry. And then the last, again, a really useful assessment, really useful analysis tool is the student progress. So I can see on this assessment how many of them have gotten better, how many stayed flat, and how many have had a downward trend. And on this, it looks like all of the students had a downward trend. So I could just grab that, I could click on this and I would get the 10 students' names, and I would know who to zero in on and focus on. And if I wanted to see how that student did, I would click on their name and it would take me back to their test. The next reports are the standards mastery report, which breaks out the standards to date. So this gives you an overall picture of how they're mastering on the standards. And you can then go also down by student name here. Let me just scroll over here. So you can see by color coding how they're doing. You can change some of these parameters. You can look for the ones that are just the standards that are just not mastered. You can compare by different demographics, and then also by ways of looking at the score. All of these reports that I'm showing you today can be downloaded and added to any gradebook that takes CSV files, or can be printed as well, just to store. And let's go back to the last one, the student profile report. Very useful tool for like one-on-one meetings, for parent-teacher conferences, for drilling down into one student's progress, or if there's, for example, a student that needs to be evaluated by a set of educators at the school, this is a tool that you can use for that. So you would just start by typing in the portion of the student's name, and you can see how they're doing overall, and the color coding shows the areas that they've mastered. This is, again, you can go by all domains. You can drill down into just the ones that have been tested. And you can also look at all of their assessments lined up and look at how they've done on the assessments. So again, each one of these can be downloaded. They can be printed to have a very data-driven discussion about a student's progress. So that was a quick overview of the reports. The reports tend to make a lot more sense once you've been using the assessment tools for a couple of weeks and you've got several assessments. Then you can really start to compare and contrast and look at the progress that's made, and then start to develop some strategies either at a school level or an individual class level, or even just for a subset of students. And that's this data, this instant data, is really powerful. I will probably end there. I think, Hannah, you want to talk maybe about a few of the resources, and then we can answer some questions.
Yeah, sure. So just this last slide to put up there, just some additional resources to help you get started and continue learning about the product. I already showed you how from the Great Minds website to access the Affirm Training Hub. Like I said, it contains some great videos, recordings of webinars like today's, as well as some resources that you can download and print and share with your teachers if you're an administrator, or to use to help guide you through the platform. Edulastic also has a fantastic training hub. I often use it when I have any question, just kind of type in my question, and there's either a short article or a video to walk you through a specific feature. Blog posts as well. And Edulastic also has a YouTube channel with recordings of webinars and other short videos to really walk you through these features. So great resources. I encourage you to check those out when you have a question, and hopefully things can be answered very quickly in that way. So that wraps up our webinar. We've been answering questions in the chat box, but if there are any others, feel free to put those in. You can also feel free to contact either Edulastic or Great Minds with questions about the platform or the product, and we'd be happy to continue the conversation after this webinar as well. All right, Ileana, I'll hand it back over to you in case you have any closing words.
Thank you, Hannah and Jenny, for the great overview of Affirm. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat or in the Q&A. We'll go ahead and answer them now. And thank you again for joining us today.